So if we stick to simple arguments, it's pretty obvious whether or not an argument is valid. And everybody should agree, whatever they think about the conclusion, whatever they think about the truth of the premises. It's not the case with soundness, though. There can be very simple arguments, and it's very much a matter of dispute whether or not it's sound. So in this video I want to look at an example of a controversial argument and apply the concepts of validity and soundness to it, and also get into some further things. So here's an argument like the one we looked at before. If there were a God, there would be no evil. Second premise, but there is evil. Conclusion, therefore there is no God. Now, this is a valid argument, which just means that if each premise were to be true, then the conclusion would have to be true as well. And here's the great thing about arguments. Arguments really focus a dispute. Here's a stupid quarrel. There is a God, there isn't a God. There is a God, there isn't a God. Yes, there is, no, there isn't. Yes, there is, no, there isn't. But what an argument does is it puts more basic issues on the table. Why do you think there's no God? Well, here's why, the atheist says. I think there's no God because there's evil in the world, and if there were a God, there wouldn't be any evil in the world. So that's why I say there's no God. Okay, now we can advance the discussion. And so is this argument, the theist, the atheist, and the agnostic should agree this argument is valid. But the question is this argument sound? Well, it's really not obvious now, is it? So this is what the atheist will say. The atheist will say, look, it's obvious that there is evil. And it's obvious that if there were a God, there would be no evil, because God's supposed to be a perfect being. He's unlimited in knowledge, unlimited in power, and unlimited in goodness. So if there were a being like that around, he would keep the universe evil free. And so if each one of those premises is true, then the whole argument will be sound. And that's how the atheist will view this. Now what about someone else? Well, someone might say, I grant that this premise is true, but I think this premise is false. So I agree that if there were a God, there would be no evil, but I think it's false that there's evil. See, I really don't think there's evil. We just call evil things that we don't prefer. Really, everything is good. And so there's no such thing as any action or any occurrence that's objectively evil. Personally, I don't think this is a good way of responding to the argument. A more common response is to say that the first premise is false and grant that the second is true. So there's different cases here, right? Someone might say, I agree that there is evil. You know, rape and murder, theft, those things are evil. They occur every day. There is evil in the world. But it's false that if there were a God, then there would be no evil. You can think of reasons why, if God existed, he would want to allow evil. Maybe God wants human beings to have free will and to be free to love him or hate him and free to become good or bad people. And so that's why premise one is false. Premise one is false because it could be that God exists and yet there is evil because God wants us to have free will. And in principle, you could argue that both of these are false. So if either or both premises are false, then the argument will be unsound. And you don't have to be an atheist or a theist or an agnostic to think the argument is unsound. I know of atheist philosophers who think this argument is unsound. And I'm aware of all kinds of people that think it's unsound. There are different reasons why you might think it was. Now, one way that people respond to arguments sometimes, and you have to be careful with this, is just the idea, is this all just a matter of opinion? Well, yes and no. It's a matter of opinion in that not all people agree that this argument is sound or that it's unsound. Some people, and even some experts in philosophy and philosophy of religion, agree. Some think that it's sound, some think that it's unsound. So it's a matter of opinion just in the sense that there isn't universal agreement about it. But this argument isn't a matter of opinion in the following senses. It's perfectly objective, that matter that it's valid. It's just a matter of its structure. And if you think this is invalid, you just don't understand the argument, or maybe you're confused about validity. So it's not at all a matter of opinion whether it's valid. Is it a matter of opinion whether it's sound? Well, yeah, because there's some people think the premises are all true, and some don't. So in that sense, there's disagreement. You could call it a matter of opinion, but it's not obviously a matter of opinion in the way that this question is a matter of opinion. Is chocolate yummier than vanilla, or is vanilla yummier than chocolate? Now that's just a matter of opinion in that there's no objective truth of the matter. Some people just prefer chocolate to vanilla, and some people just prefer vanilla to chocolate. Now, do some people prefer to believe premise one, and some prefer to not believe premise one? Yeah, but look, there is a question of evidence here. Presumably, the atheist could say, look, here's some other considerations which make one obviously true, and some other which make two obviously true. They could back up their premises. So it's not all a matter of opinion. You need to consider evidence for and against one and two. And the theist could present evidence for thinking that one or both of these are false. So it's a matter of reason is what it is. It's something that we ought to think about. It's an opinion in the sense that not everybody agrees whether this argument is sound or not. But it's not a matter of opinion in that you can just sort of think whatever you want and there aren't any other considerations that are relevant. So we've seen that we are looking for arguments that are not only valid, but we want arguments as well that are sound. And sound arguments, we can make a further distinction now. Some of them are cogent, and some of them are non-cogent. And a cogent sound argument is just one where a person can tell that it is valid and sound. So the idea of cogency is person relative. Now suppose there were a sound argument like this. All triangles have three sides. No square has three sides, therefore no square is a triangle. That one is a sound argument, and it's cogent to all of us. We're all able to tell right away that it's both valid and sound. But I could bring in my friend the mathematics professor, and she could put up a really complicated argument on the board with, many steps in the argument. And these steps have very complicated mathematical formulae, and she could just tell us that it was sound. And she could be right that it's sound, but if you and I aren't very good at mathematics, it would not be cogent to you and I. But it would be cogent to her. So if you can tell that an argument is valid and sound, the argument is cogent for you. You could have a very complicated argument that was cogent to some expert but not cogent to other people. And of course, so we want arguments which are not only valid and sound, we want arguments which are cogent to us, right? Because that will give us a reason for thinking that the conclusion is true. One more distinction, which is important to note, and that is one more concept, the concept of a proof or demonstration. A proof or a demonstration is an argument which is cogent to any normal adult human. Basically, a proof or a demonstration is a sound argument which is really a knockdown argument which really establishes the conclusion. It can't be an argument where experts disagree. It has to be the kind of argument which is, one might say, self-evident, where each premise is self-evident, and where it's also self-evident that the argument is valid. A kind of you could call this a knockdown argument or an argument that hits a home run, and sadly there are not very many arguments like this. So the argument I just gave for atheism a while ago is obviously not a proof in this sense, because it's not cogent to any normal adult human. There are believers in God who do understand the argument, and they don't agree. It doesn't seem cogent to them. It doesn't seem sound. So there may be proofs in areas like logic and geometry, but it's very rare to have a proof in philosophy. Most of the arguments are such that experts disagree about them, and it's just not going to persuade everybody. But look, just because you don't have a proof doesn't mean that you should despair. Maybe you don't have an argument which can convince every sane adult, but it still might be a sound argument. And an argument which you can tell is cogent, an argument which is cogent for you, that's one that you know to be sound. That gives you a good reason to believe the conclusion. Okay, so there aren't very many proofs, and arguments are not really a matter of opinion, in that their validity is perfectly objective. They're a matter of opinion in that people evaluate them differently for soundness, but they're not purely a matter of opinion, because there are usually considerations that can be brought to bear on whether or not each premise is true or false.